I urge my colleagues, do not tie the hands of this president or any president in protecting America against terrorists. Leave to those presidents the tools they need to effectively protect the United States of America. Defeat the IAT amendment. I yield the floor.
The senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I believe we have cleared with the two distinguished senators who are managing the bill this unanimous consent request, which is to set aside the pending amendment and call up my amendment number 857.
Without objection, the clerk will report.
The senator from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez, for himself and others, proposes an amendment numbered 857 to amendment number 738.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the further reading be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, let me speak to this amendment. I offer this amendment along with my distinguished colleague from Georgia, Senator Isaacson, to temporarily restore the conforming loan limits that expired, loan limits that we had under the law that created the opportunity for these abilities to loan at these levels. They expired on September 30th of this year. And in past years, extending these loan limits has usually occurred on the THUD appropriations bills. Mr. President, as the subcommittee chair on housing, I can tell you that getting our housing market moving again is one of the most important tasks facing our country today, because if we don't get that weak housing market moving again, we won't get the kind of robust economic recovery that the American people deserve. Historically, whenever we have been in the midst of an economic challenge or a recession, housing has been part of what has led us out of that recession. So Congress could be doing a great deal to get the housing market moving again, but perhaps the first rule that we should follow is do no harm. Do no harm. But at this point, Congress, in my view, is doing harm to the housing market and to our economic recovery by allowing the higher loan limits to expire. With this bipartisan amendment, we can easily correct this problem. The lower loan limits of the Federal Housing Administration, government-sponsored enterprises, and Veterans Administration have already resulted in a reduction of consumer credit in 669 counties across 42 states in our country. The expiration is making a weak housing market even weaker, and also makes it harder for middle-class homebuyers to get mortgages when credit is already tight. And every day that passes is another day in which credit-worthy borrowers aren't getting loans or are having to pay much higher rates that could price them out of the market, and those loans aren't going to come back. Now, I recently chaired a housing subcommittee hearing on a different topic where the witnesses were not chosen for their views on a particular issue. They represented an entire cross-section of all of the interested stakeholders in the housing field, including those that were submitted to us by our Republican colleagues to consider as witnesses, and there were several. 8 of the 9 bipartisan witnesses who testified in the hearing agreed that the conforming loan limits should be temporarily extended to boost the housing market, and that now is not the right time to let them expire. One of the witnesses, Dr. Mark Sandy, the chief economist of Moody's Analytics, urged that the limits be extended, quote, for at least another year. That's a reversal of Dr. Sandy's position from earlier this year when he had supported the expiration. He said at the hearing that markets remain too fragile and that allowing the limits to expire would be an error. A recent report by the nonpartisan Congressional Research Service found that, quote, virtually no jumbo mortgages are being securitized today. In other words, in an ideal world where the private sector would fill this gap in home mortgages, the reality is that the economic conditions right now aren't allowing for that. It certainly hasn't taken place. And in terms of costs, our amendment will actually save $11 million over the next 10 years and $2 million in fiscal year 2012, according to CBO. It is more than fully paid for in a fair way by creating a premium loan fee of 15 basis points per year that would apply only to the affected loans. This makes sense because the people benefiting from the loans would be directly responsible for paying the cost of those loans, so taxpayers are made whole and no other home buyers would pay. And as I say, it saves $11 million over the next 10 years. Additionally, the amendment will likely help increase returns to taxpayers because FHA audits for the past decade have stated that the larger loans actually perform better and default at significantly lower rates than smaller loans, so allowing the larger loans could actually improve returns to taxpayers. Finally, I want to thank the co-sponsors of a very similar bipartisan bill, similar to the very essence of what we're trying to do in this amendment, that Senator Isaacson and I have introduced, the Homeowner Affordability Act, where Senators Akaka, Begich, Blumenthal, Boxer, Scott Brown, Cardin, Chambliss, Coons, Feinstein, Inouye, Lautenberg, Lieberman, Merkley, Mikulski, Bill Nelson, and Senator Schumer have become co-sponsors of. And I'd like to thank the National Association of Realtors, the National Association of Home Builders, the Mortgage Bankers Association, and all the other groups that have advocated and supported for this effort. This is an important tool that we can use to boost our housing market and economic recovery at no cost to the taxpayers. I see my distinguished colleague, Senator Isaacson, on the floor, and I certainly would invite him as the co-sponsor of this amendment, someone who has a long history in the private sector before he came to the Congress on the whole question of real estate. I'd be happy to yield to him at this time.
I thank the distinguished senator from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez, for his leadership on this issue. I ask to be recognized.
The senator from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. President, let me try and dispel what concern there may be and the concern that I heard right before we adjourned in August as to why not to extend the loan limits. People were afraid, and I understand the fear, that it might cause some additional liability and cost to the government and the taxpayer. Let me make something crystal clear. We're going through a terrible foreclosure problem right now in this country, not because of loan limits, but because of underwriting. And underwriting today, because of the ramifications of the real estate collapse, is the most pristine underwriting I have ever seen. I was in the business for 33 years, since 1966. I've seen a lot of housing recessions go by. I've seen a lot of difficulties. This one's the worst I've ever seen, but it was not caused by the amount of loans made. It was caused by underwriting. As Mr. Menendez has said, Senator Menendez has said, this will pay the government back because of the fee associated with the loan in the first place. In the second place, it will answer the big question we need to start answering in this country, and that is doing no more harm. A lot of the problems that have been manifested in the real estate industry have been manifested by our doing harm, either in what we imposed on Freddie and Fannie or what we did not allow to have happen. The restrictions now on mortgage underwriting under Dodd-Frank and the requirements that are now true in all of our underwriting agencies are so strict that the underwriting of loans is so pristine that only the best of the best is being made. The unintended consequences of not extending these increases in August caused a number of real estate transactions that were made to never close because the limit went down, therefore the loan went down. No one in this body should confuse the amount of a loan with its ability to be repaid. They need to understand it is the underwriting of the loan that ensures the repayment. This, as the Senator said, will add an income to the United States government. It will not add additional pressure on the United States taxpayer, and it will at least give us breathing room in a housing industry that is still troubling terribly. So I'd ask any of our members who were objecting back in August to these loan limits being restored, please come see me. I don't know a lot about many things. I know a whole lot about this because I made my living all my life. I have no interest anymore, so there's no self-interest, except to know that we're in deep trouble in our economy. You're never going to get 9% unemployment down until you bring construction back. You're never going to get the American consumer to have more confidence until they feel like the value of their home is secure. And those things aren't going to happen if a reluctant Congress continues to pass suppressing legislation or keep these loan limits down rather than doing things that will do no harm and help the housing market. So I lend my full support to Senator Menendez and what he has done and ask a favorable consideration by our colleagues in the Senate.
President,
Senator from Maryland.
I would like to compliment the gentleman from New Jersey for this amendment. I think it's common sense, and I think it accomplishes so many objectives. Number one, it helps people with real problems be able to get back on their feet, maintain home ownership, and get our economy going and put people to work. I know that the gentleman from New Jersey and others here support an infrastructure bank. Yeah, we want to build roads and bridges. I'd like to take broadband to every part of America. But we also need to look at home building. And mine has come to a screeching halt. Even in a robust community, a robust state like Maryland. And everybody I talk to in the Maryland business community that says unless you crack the housing situation, you can't crack the economic situation. By having access to the American dream, which has now become an American nightmare, but this American dream created jobs, whether the people who built them, the real estate developers who developed them, the people like Senator Isaacson, who made a career of selling them. And this was about building homes, and in many instances it was about building community. I think that where we are with these mortgage, keep doing the Menendez amendment will go a long way in being able to help people. We've got to really deal with this. And quite frankly, I've been disappointed. Just about every darn thing that we've done to, quote, help with the housing mortgage situation has been a bust. It's been an absolute bust. We spent millions and so on, and we had this program, and we have catchy little titles, but nothing catches on to solve the mortgage crisis. I believe the Menendez amendment, supported by someone who really understands business and housing and community, I think this amendment's a winner. I'm happy to put my name on it, and I'll look forward to voting for it when the time comes.
Senator from New Jersey.
Just very briefly, I want to thank my distinguished colleague from Maryland and the bill manager here, and I hope we'll get to a point where we can cast a vote on this, and I appreciate Senator Isaacson joining me and others in this effort, and particularly his expertise. If we listen to voices of reason as well as experience here, then Senator Isaacson's arguments should be a winner. And I look forward to hopefully having a vote. Thank you very much. Yield the floor.
Senator from Utah.
Recommit with instructions with respect to H.R. 2112 at the desk.
The clerk will report.
Senator from Utah, Mr. Lee, moves to recommit the bill H.R. 21.
Ask unanimous consent that further reading be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Senator from Utah.
I stand to speak on behalf of this motion to recommit. What we're looking at here with H.R. 2112 is a measure that actually spends more in each of these areas than what we spent in fiscal year 2011. Now, we are in dire economic circumstances in this country. We're currently spending at a rate roughly $1.5 trillion annually, in excess of what we're bringing in. We've gone to great lengths through a number of accounting mechanisms to demonstrate to the American people we're doing our best to spend less. And in many circumstances, the message that has been sent has been a message of austerity. It becomes increasingly difficult to manage and to maintain that necessary message of austerity, one that is accompanied by hundreds of millions of Americans making sacrifices every day in response to this economic downturn. It becomes absolutely essential that we actually make cuts. To make actual cuts, I think that means necessarily that we have to spend less in fiscal year 2012 than what we spent in fiscal year 2011. We will continue, I fear, to lack credibility if we persist in using whatever techniques we use, accounting-wise or otherwise, to claim that we're reducing spending, when in fact this appropriations package, this minibus spending package, as we sometimes refer to it, actually spends more money than was spent in 2011. This is why I've submitted this motion, and I hope that my colleagues will share this concern that I've expressed, which has caused me to submit this motion. The idea of the motion is that we bring our spending levels back down in each of these areas to what we spent in fiscal year 2011. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Mr. President.
Will the senator withhold his request? Senator from Maryland.
Under the previous order, the motion to recommit is set aside. Senator from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. President, we have set aside the motion to recommit offered by the gentleman from Utah. However, I object I wish to rise in opposition to his motion. This is all about budget speak, and it's really hard to follow between budget authority and expenditures, et cetera. But let me just say this in plain English. This bill is $500 million less than we spent in 2011. $500 million less than we spent in 2011. Now, this isn't the chairperson of the CJS bill kind of making up numbers. This is confirmed by the Congressional Budget Office, and it's been certified by the chairman of the Budget Committee. The CJS bill is nearly $500 million less than last year. Now, am I doing fuzzy math? No, I don't do fuzzy math. The CJS bill is consistent with something called the Budget Control Act. The Budget Control Act required appropriations to cut $7 billion for our fiscal year 2012. When we got our allocations, the CJS subcommittee allocation was $500 million below 2011. I'm going to say it again, $500 million below what we spent in 2011. This allocation required the CJS committee to take stern and even drastic measures. Mr. President, I eliminated 30 programs. Yes, Senator Barbara Mikulski, a Democrat, a liberal, I cut and eliminated 30 programs. 4 in commerce, 1 I think you object to, 20 in justice, 1 in space, 4 in the National Science Foundation. I couldn't believe it, but that's what we had to do. We cut the Deep Underground Science and Engineering Lab by $1 billion. That was a $1 billion project that the National Science Foundation wanted. We said we'd like it too, but not in these austere times. There were other programs that we were able to do, and we weren't happy about it. We absolutely weren't happy about it. We cut the Baldrige program. We cut the Public Telecommunications Facility in Planning and Communication. I mean, what we did, what we had to do. So while the senator looks at, I'm not sure what, I can tell you, we are $500 million below 2011. The Congressional Budget Office says it. The numbers were reviewed by the Budget Committee itself. The chairman signed off that we were $500 million below to help the overall Appropriations Committee reduce its expenditures by $7 billion. So that's for 2011. Then let's look at 2012. I mean, the President came to the Congress and gave a dynamic State of the Union speech. It touched America deeply when he said, I want to outbuild, out-educate, out-innovate anyone in the world. And he proposed his budget. Well, when you look at what we're doing here, my appropriations, my Commerce Justice appropriations is $5 billion. That's B like in Barb, not $5 million like in M like in Mikulski. We are $5 billion below what the President said he needed in commerce, justice, science, technology, the Innovation Subcommittee to help out-educate and out-innovate anybody else in the world. So I'm $5 billion less than what the President of the United States said he needed to have to accomplish national goals. Now, we talk a lot about we want America the exceptional. Well, you got to spend money to be exceptional. And we put your money in science, technology, education, where we can come up with new ideas, new products that we can make and sell around the world, and that our children know that they have a future in this new global economy. So I don't want to be nickeled and dimed here. I've already been nickeled and dimed to be able to comply with this bill. You know, I'm back to where Obama was in January, that cold day, and now here we are. So when we talk about cutting, we've cut. We've absolutely cut. We've cut discretionary spending at an incredible level. And do you think it's helped create one job? Do you think the market's going, hoorah, hoorah, look at what they're doing? No. And you know why? Because the private sector knows that if we're going to be a 21st century nation, if we are going to be America and the exceptional, we must educate. And we also must to invest in scientific research so that the private sector can take that basic research that we do, value add to it, and with the genius that is America, the ability that intellectual property you can own and be protected, that you're going to develop a product, and you have the National Institutes of Standards to come and help you develop the standards so that you will be able to sell it in America, in every state, and sell it around the world in every nation. So come on. If we want to be American, the exceptional, stop nickel and diming. That in order to grow and be prosperous, and one of the ways that you deal with debt is a growing economy, restoring consumer confidence, restoring citizen confidence. Number one, that we can govern ourselves, and that we can govern ourselves in a smart fashion. Yes, we do need to be frugal, but we sure don't need to be stupid. I'm going to oppose this amendment, and I sure hope that people pass my bill. I yield the floor.
The senator from Arkansas.
President, I see that I have other colleagues on the floor, but I'll only be a couple of minutes here. Mr. President, today I rise to oppose an amendment offered by Senator Moran. It's amendment number 815. I really do appreciate the intent of Senator Moran's amendment, and I actually support the intent of what he's trying to do because he is trying to support the watershed rehabilitation program. While I'm not opposed to that program, and I recognize that difficult decisions had to be made in order to meet our statutory spending caps outlined in the Budget Control Act, I regret to say that I cannot support the Senator's amendment as it's written because its offset comes from departmental administration, which provides numerous essential services to the USDA. These cuts would force USDA to reduce their number of employees, which would have a detrimental effect on the department and its operation. In fact, Secretary Vilsack reached out to the Agriculture Appropriations Subcommittee staff to relay his very serious concerns. The USDA employees provide essential services to some of the most rural areas of the country. So I cannot support the amendment, which would, in effect, reduce the services to rural America. And on top of that, it's important for all my colleagues to understand that the level for departmental administration is already over $13 million below fiscal year 2010 level, and $7 million below, that's $7 million below the President's request. So although I definitely support the Watershed Rehabilitation Program, I certainly hope that Senator Cole and Senator Moran can find a good offset that is agreeable to the majority of us. Still, I must oppose this amendment and urge other senators to oppose it as well. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Alabama.
From Colorado I was going to call up an amendment and make some remarks. There's some procedural matter or something that senators would be interested in doing before that. If not, would plan to go forward.
What's procedural?
Well, I just thought maybe he wanted to comment on Senator Pryor's prior comments or something.
Mr. President, I have another set of comments I'd like to make on a pending amendment, but I don't know where we are in the order here.
To offer an amendment?
I wish to comment and rise in opposition to an amendment that's already been offered.
And did the senator...
Mr. President, I guess I have the floor.
But as the manager, I'm seeking for clarification. The senator
I would yield to the senator for question.
Does the senator wish to comment on the Moran amendment?
I wish to comment on Amendment 753, which was offered by the junior senator from New Hampshire.
On the trying of terrorism?
Yes, on military tribunals.
Okay.
And I'd like to...
We're alternating back and forth. So Senator Sessions and then Senator...
I thank the senator from Maryland for a clarification. I'd look forward to hearing from the senator from Alabama, and then...
And then we turn to the senator from Colorado for his comments.
The senator from Alabama.
Thank you, and I'd ask unanimous consent that the senator from Colorado be recognized after I complete my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. President, pursuant to the unanimous consent agreement, I call up the Sessions Amendment number 810.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Alabama, Mr. Sessions, proposes an amendment number 810 to amendment number 738.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the reading of the amendment in its entirety. Mr. President, Amendment 810 the purpose of it is to eliminate the categorical eligibility for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the SNAP program, or the food stamp program. A categorical eligibility standard has been imposed, and it's been causing a substantial increase in unjustified expenditures in food stamp program. Let me just share briefly the history over the last decade of the food stamp program. Of course, we in America strongly believe that persons ought not to go to bed hungry if we've got the food and the ability to take care of them. And we've had a very generous food stamp program for a number of years. But in the last decade, it's shown incredible, amazing increases in spending. Matter of fact, I think it would increase it has increased faster than probably any other significant item in the entire federal budget. It is probably increasing more even than interest on the debt, which is one of the most surging expenditures this nation has. In 2001, we expended $20 billion on the food stamp program. This year, we're projected under this bill to spend $80 billion. In 10 years, spending on food stamps would have increased 400%. This year's proposal calls for an increase of 14% over last year. This is a stunning amount of money. This country is headed to financial crisis. Mr. Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson, who headed President Obama's debt task force, told us in the Budget Committee that the country has never faced a more serious financial crisis than the debt crisis that we're now on. And one of the reasons is we've had these incredible surges of expenditures in programs over a period of years. We've not watched them. We've not contained them. Indeed, we've taken action that made them less accountable and less efficient and more subject to fraud, abuse, and waste. So this year proposes another 14% increase in the food stamp program. Now that's $80 billion. The House proposed only a $1 billion increase. Theirs comes in at $71 billion for food stamps. So theirs is more level, but it still has an increase, but certainly far less than this. To give some perspective on what we're talking about when we say $80 billion, let me just share a few facts. The federal prison system costs $7 billion. The Department of Justice, the entire Department of Justice, which Senator Whitehouse and I served in and we're proud to do so, gets $31 billion. The highway bill, the federal highway funding for the entire year, $40 billion. Food stamps twice the federal highway bill. Customs and Border Patrol, they get $12 billion. The Education Department, federal education aid, is $30 billion. $80 billion dwarfs the budgets of, I think, most any state in the country, unless it's New York or California. Alabama's general fund budget and the educational budget is less than $10 billion. This is $80 billion, and it increases $10 billion this year under this bill. And I would just say to my colleagues, we've got to get real. We don't have the money. We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. No wonder Congress is in such disrepute. How can we defend ourselves against a charge of irresponsibility to good and decent American citizens when we're spending at this rate and continuing to show increased spending at this rate now? I'm still amazed at the budget the President submitted us earlier this year, called for a 10% increase in the Education Department, 10% for the Energy Department, 10% for the State Department. At a time we're borrowing money at a rate we've never borrowed before, at a time when we have never, ever systemically faced such a substantial threat to our country's financial welfare, as every expert has so told. I know we want to help poor people, and I don't want to see people hungry, but do we need to be spending 4 times as much on food stamps as we were in 2001? Can we not look at this program and see if we can make it better and more efficient? By the way, one of the things that really has concerned me, Mr. President, I believe we've got a little chatter going on back here. It's kind of hard to think.
May we have order so that the Senator from Alabama's remarks are not disturbed?
So I just would say we need to get focused on what we're doing here and try to bring this matter under control, and we can do better. So the federal regulations require states under the food stamp program, and by the way, states administer the program. They don't get money to enforce it and supervise it. They pay that out of their own budget, but the food stamps are a 100% federally funded program. So there's a little bit of a conflict of interest. States are benefited when more food stamps come into their state, right? It's federal dollars. They're not paying any money in it. Why spend their money to catch fraud, waste, and abuse and crack down on problems? Why not utilize every possible action that would bring more food stamps to the state? And that's what's happening. I know a little bit about that because I probably, unless the presiding officer is one, would be the only person in this body who's actually prosecuted food stamp fraud. In certain areas of the country, food stamps are currency used in drug dealing. It's just a lot of fraud going on out there, and we need to do better about it. The states aren't really stepping up because they don't have an incentive to do so. So the federal regulations now require states, them to make households categorically eligible for the SNAP program, the food stamp program, simply because the household also receives certain other benefits or assistance from federal programs. Categorical eligibility is a fancy way of saying automatically qualified. If you qualify for one, you qualify for another. For example, households that receive temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, or supplemental Social Security income benefits, or assistance, they are automatically eligible for SNAP benefits. These other programs, however, have looser eligibility standards than the food stamp program. To be eligible for SNAP benefits, a household must meet specific income and asset tests. Households with income above a certain threshold or savings above a certain amount cannot qualify for food stamps. So if you've got a substantial savings, even if you don't have any income, you're not entitled for somebody else to pay your food. I don't know what the number is, but you've got a savings amount. And if you're above that, you don't get food stamps. Is that irrational? But in 42 states, there is no limit on the amount of assets that certain households may have to qualify for the TANF program. As a result, households with substantial assets but low income would be deemed eligible for SNAP benefits even if they have substantial assets. Astonishingly, households can be categorically eligible for SNAP even if they receive no TANF-funded services other than a toll-free number or informational brochure. I kid you not. That's what they tell me. Merely the act of receiving the information about the TANF or other applicable programs can qualify a household to be categorically eligible for SNAP benefits. A 2010 GAO report revealed that one state included information about a pregnancy prevention hotline on the SNAP applications, and that was used as a basis to grant categorical eligibility. Other states reported providing household brochures with information about marriage classes in order to confer categorical eligibility to food stamps. According to the officials with the Food and Nutrition Service, increased use of categorical eligibility by states has increased approval of SNAP benefits to households who would not otherwise have been eligible for the program due to the household asset or income limits. So GAO, the Food and Nutrition Service, who supervises this, acknowledged that more people are eligible if you use this categorical eligibility rather than requiring them to comply with the explicit requirements of the food stamp program. So my amendment would eliminate categorical eligibility for SNAP benefits, taking us back to where we were just a few years ago, meaning that only those who meet the income and asset requirements under the program would be eligible for benefits. They'd have to apply like anyone else. Is it too much to ask someone who's going to be receive thousands of dollars in food benefits from the federal government to fill out a form and to honestly state whether or not they're in need and to a degree that qualifies for the program? Automatic eligibility through other income support programs would end under my amendment. So last Friday, the Treasury Department closed the books on fiscal year 2011 and declared that the federal government ended the year with a $1.23 trillion in additional debt. That makes our gross debt now $15 trillion. Our appropriations for the SNAP program have gone from $20 billion in 2001 to $71 billion in 2011 and projected now to go to $80 billion. From 2001 through 2011, that is a multiple increase in funding for the program. The percentage of people using food stamps has increased sevenfold since the program's national expansion in the 70s, with nearly 1 in 7 Americans now receiving the benefit. Meanwhile, food stamp funds have been mishandled and misused, and there are many examples of it. And I've seen it in my personal practice as a federal prosecutor. But in one recent notorious case, a defendant in the Operation Fast and Furious, one of the people that came in and bought a whole host of illegal weapons in Arizona to take back across into Mexico, was a food stamp recipient. According to the report, he spent thousands of dollars on these guns, maybe tens of thousands of dollars on these expensive weapons. He got 300 high-powered assault rifles he bought. Had money for that, and we're buying his food for him. In another case, a Michigan man was able to continue receiving food stamps after winning $2 million in the lottery. $2 million. He asked about it. He said, "Can I continue to receive food stamps?" And you know what they told him? Yes. The lottery, you see, winning was an asset, and we're not checking assets now. It's not income. It's an asset. So you get to keep having food stamps while American working people are paying for it. Categorical eligibility, that flawed practice allows SNAP recipients to avoid the asset test required to determine need, and this is a policy we can't afford at a time this country is having this huge debt crisis. President Obama has coined a somewhat disingenuous term, we think, called the Buffett rule, in his push to raise taxes on millions of Americans who have zero in common with Mr. Buffett. Of course, he's one of the president's big allies, but I would like to suggest something called a Solyndra rule. Under this rule, before any proposals are offered to raise any taxes, we first put an end to the wasteful, inappropriate spending in Washington. Shouldn't we first clean up our act before we demand of the American people to send more money up here? Until we do that, raising tax rates only will be funding continuing abuse of the American taxpayer. Raising taxes to bail out Congress is like giving money to the alcoholic on the way to the liquor store. It doesn't help matters if the money comes from a wealthy person, if the money is going to be used for an unwise or unhealthy result. So it's time for the President and this Senate to get their spending habits under control. And these bills before us, I'm afraid, and the ones that we will be seeing, really don't reduce spending but increase spending. So, Mr. President, I thank the Chair for the opportunity to express my concerns about it. Finally, I would just say, we're told we can't do anything about it. We're told we can't fix the food stamps. Food stamps don't count like other appropriations. So you say, why is that? Well, they say it's an entitlement. Well, what is an entitlement? Well, an entitlement is when there's a law that says if your income is a certain level, you go into the government and they have to give you money whether the government has any money or not, whether it's been appropriated or not. It's an entitlement program. So it makes it very hard for those of us in Congress to really be able to make the kind of proposals that are appropriate to fix this program, one of which simply would be, in my opinion, to reduce the spending back to the level of the House. Showing a modest increase this year after surging the spending level for the SNAP program over the last decade. And all of us have got to grasp something. I don't think the American people are happy hearing excuses. I don't think they're happy hearing us say, well, we would like to have done something about food stamps, but this is not germane. This somehow technically is a entitlement program. It's part of a legislative act, and therefore you can't do anything about it on an appropriations bill. We're here today. You can't really change it. There have been some changes in the food stamp program, so we believe this amendment is clearly germane. But I just want to say, as we wrestle with how to bring spending in America under control, as a person now the ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, I want to say we've got to quit using excuses. Every program has got to be rigorously analyzed. And if there's waste, fraud, and abuse, we need to crack down on it. We don't have the money. We don't have the money. We can't do what we'd like to do. We can't just increase spending for program after program. And this one is perhaps one of the most dramatic in the government, and it can really be improved if we focus on it. I thank the chair and would yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the senator from Colorado has the floor.
Mr. President, I welcome the spirited debate we've been having in the Senate today on these important appropriations bills. I wanted to yield before I begin my remarks to the chairwoman of the Agricultural Committee, who I know has some comments in response to Senator Sessions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
If I might just take a moment to respond.
We have an order that's been established. I can understand the gentlelady, but how long does the gentlelady from Michigan wish to talk?
I was going to take 2 minutes just to respond to the previous senator.
Okay.
Is there objection?
No objection.
Senator from Michigan is recognized.
I appreciate the courtesy very much. I did want to just take a brief moment and indicate to my friend from Alabama that I couldn't agree more that we need to make sure the food assistance programs, every farm program, every program in the federal government has rigorous review, and that we are holding taxpayer dollars accountable. We have held accountability hearings in the Senate Agriculture Committee. The good news is that there is only a 4% error rate in the entire SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Program being talked about, but there's more we can do. The case he talked about in Michigan on the lottery was outrageous, and it has been fixed. You can't do it anymore, and we're going to fix it in the next Farm Bill as well. I could not agree more. We're going to go through, we're going to fix those things that don't make sense, but I would also say that what he's suggesting is, first of all, policy that needs to be done in the context of the Farm Bill negotiations. We have an extraordinary agreement, Mr. President, that we have reached with myself and our ranking member in the Senate and the chair and ranking member in the House of the Agriculture Committees. We are putting together language to give to the Super Committee that will address nutrition as well as other areas. I would ask my colleagues to support our effort that we will be putting forward and have language by November 1 to be able to do that, that will address the egregious areas, which, by the way, are very small, but we need to address them, and we need to do it in a way that also recognizes that more people need food help than ever before in their entire life. And I have people in Michigan today who've never needed help in their entire life, paid taxes all their lives, are mortified that they can't keep food on the table for their children throughout the month, and they are getting temporary help, and that's what it's designed for, people who need temporary help. So because of that, we want every single dollar to go where it ought to go, and we're going to do everything possible, and we're going to be putting forward policies that I'm sure the Senate will support that will guarantee that there's not $1 that's going to somebody that doesn't deserve it, somebody who's cheating, fraud, or abuse. We're going to make sure that happens, but this debate needs to be done in the context, as it always has been, of our Farm Bill policy on food and nutrition. So I would ask my colleagues to oppose this and to work with us as we put forward policies that will be coming very soon. Thank you, and I yield back to the senator from Colorado and thank him for his graciousness.
Mr. President, I appreciate
Senator from Colorado.
the senator from Maryland's patience with us. This is a spirited debate, important set of amendments being offered today. I want to rise in opposition to Amendment 753, which has been offered by the senator from New Hampshire, Ms. Ayotte. Now, I enjoy working with Senator Ayotte on the Armed Services Committee, and I appreciate her contributions to the committee. But I have to say I strongly disagree with her amendment. Senator Ayotte's amendment would prohibit the United States from trying enemy combatants in Article III civilian courts. These courts refer to Article III of our United States Constitution. Our Article III courts, as the presiding officer knows, are the envy of the world. And while there is a role for military tribunals, they are certainly not the only solution. And frankly, by prohibiting the use of Article III courts, we may actually hinder our efforts to bring terrorists to justice. The Ayotte amendment would put the military smack in the middle of our domestic law enforcement efforts in our fight against extremist terrorists. My friend from New Hampshire argues that this is a war that should be prosecuted by our military, but the reality is that in many cases the best course of action is for our domestic law enforcement, the FBI, and others to take the lead. This amendment would prevent the Department of Justice from questioning or prosecuting terrorists caught on U.S. soil engaged in a criminal act of terrorism, and it would prevent federal prosecutors from bringing these terrorists to justice in so-called Article III courts. Federal prosecutors, Mr. President, have tried, convicted, and imprisoned hundreds of terrorists in Article III courts. The Department of Defense has obtained only 6 convictions in military tribunals. DOD's job is to track down, kill, or capture those who would harm America or our citizens. They do an incredible job of that, and we all stand in awe of the work that they do to keep us safe. But it's not the Department of Defense's job to try each and every one of those individuals. It's a mission they don't want, and they would have to radically change their entire system to accommodate prisoners that are already handled by civilian courts. Article III courts have kept Americans safe for over 200 years. And I have to say, I just don't believe that it's prudent to build a new judicial system from scratch in order to meet objectives that are already being met. For example, Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, also known as the underwear bomber, was arrested in Detroit after trying to set off an explosive on an airplane. He was read his rights, questioned, prosecuted, and he recently pled guilty. Under this amendment, the FBI would have had to call in the military to detain Abdul Muttalib without any resolution in his case. And in fact, and I think this is an extremely important point, under this amendment, Abdul Muttalib would have been given complete immunity from criminal federal prosecution. Further, if this amendment passes, our allies may well refuse to extradite terrorist suspects to the United States. And if military commissions are determined to someday not have jurisdiction over these terrorists or invalidated by the Supreme Court, which, by the way, has happened in other settings in the Supreme Court, there would be no way ever to prosecute these high-value foreign terrorism suspects because of this amendment. Well, what would that mean, Mr. President? Well, this would mean no conviction of the blind sheikh who planned the first World Trade Center attack, no conviction of Moussaoui, the 20th hijacker on 9/11, and no convictions of the East Africa embassy bombers, all of whom were convicted in Article III courts. Again, the Ayotte Amendment, however well intended, would provide 100% immunity from federal prosecution to suspected terrorists and eviscerate a very effective tool in our counterterrorism portfolio. This doesn't strike me as being as tough as we possibly could be on terrorists. Mr. President, the fact is that the prosecutors at the Department of Justice have numerous federal criminal laws at their disposal with which to charge suspected terrorists. The federal courts have more than 200 years of precedent to guide them, while tribunals have almost none. And as I've said, our federal prosecutors have had great success so far. So, in summary, I urge my colleagues to vote against Amendment 753. It's simply not necessary, and I believe it will do more harm than good while subverting the finest justice system in the world in the process. And as I yield, Mr. President, let me be clear that I wholeheartedly support the underlying bill that's been so ably authored by Senator Mikulski and others, but I have to oppose this amendment. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, The Senator from New Hampshire.
Mr. President, I rise in response to my esteemed colleague from Colorado's comments about my Amendment 753. And I would say this first. My amendment does not provide immunity to terrorists. What my amendment does is treats terrorists as they should be. We're at war, and under the laws of war, traditionally, we have tried people in military commissions, military tribunals, and those individuals that my colleague from Colorado cited, including the Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab, could be held accountable in a military commission, because our priority has to be, when we are at war, to gather intelligence, to protect our country, and not where we should prosecute in our Article III courts, which I have great confidence in. I served as Attorney General of our state and believe very much in our Article III court system, but our Article III court system is not where terrorists should be tried whom we are at war with. And in light of the recent comments here on the floor, I feel compelled to point out some of the facts that I think are important for the American people to know about some of the cases that have been cited in support of saying that terrorists should be tried in Article III courts. On October 12th, Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab pleaded guilty in the U.S. District Court in Detroit, and that case has been cited by not only the senator from Colorado, but by the senator from Maryland and the senator from Illinois as a shining example that, and our Attorney General has cited it as well, as the ultimate and final vindication of the use of our civilian courts for the trial of enemy combatants. The senior senator from Illinois in the Obama administration were so confident that the so-called underwear bomber, as he's been named, guilty plea would settle the dispute once and for all, that on October 13th, the senator from Illinois came to the floor and essentially declared the controversy over. And we've heard those same arguments today. I think we need to review who exactly Abdulmutallab is. He's no common criminal. We're not talking about people who have robbed liquor stores or who are Americans who have committed criminal acts in this country. He's the Nigerian man who tried to detonate plastic explosives hidden in his underwear while on board Northwest Airlines Flight 253 to Detroit on December 25th of 2009. He was a member of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, claimed to have organized an attack with the underwear bomber. They organized it with him, claiming that al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula supplied him with the bomb and trained him how to do it. He was subsequently charged in federal court with 8 counts, including the attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction and attempted murder of 290 Americans. The underwear bomber pleaded guilty at trial, telling a surprised courtroom on the second day of his trial that the failed attack was in retaliation for the killing of Muslims worldwide. This has been cited as the final vindication for civilian trials, and I think it's important to mention 3 points about this case. First of all, the presumption seems to be that the civilian court system should have the primary responsibility for questioning, trying, and ultimately detaining foreign enemy combatants with whom the United States is in a declared war with. That's not been the rule in prior conflicts. We are treating this conflict differently than we have treated other conflicts where our enemies have been tried in military commissions. First point. Second, in my view, the administration's eagerness to appease the ACLU by trying enemy combatants in civilian courts misses the whole point about detention in the time of war. When we're at war, we detain and interrogate enemy combatants according to the laws of war to glean valuable intelligence that will help prevent future attacks, save American lives, and help us capture other enemy combatants. Al-Qaeda was at war with the United States long before our country recognized or strongly reacted to this threat. We remain at war with Al-Qaeda, and when we put enemy combatants in our civilian court system, we are focusing on prosecution, and we potentially miss important opportunities to gather information to prevent future attacks. By doing so, In Abdulmutallab's case, the administration read him his Miranda rights after 50 minutes of questioning. In my view, this jeopardized valuable intelligence, and I know that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have said, well, eventually he spoke and he gave us lots of information. But why would we put information in jeopardy? Why would we read terrorists' Miranda rights? Because I, as a prosecutor, have never heard a law enforcement official tell me that Miranda rights are a helpful information-gathering tool, but that seems to be the position that I'm hearing today. This jeopardized intelligence was clearly unnecessary, and in this case, the fact that we didn't have to rely on a confession, this was a case where we caught the underwear bomber red-handed, so even if we were to have treated him in a military commission and had not given him Miranda rights, had gathered intelligence for as long as we could have, we still would have had him red-handed because the passengers on that flight saw him. He was caught with the explosives in hands. This was never a case about a guilty plea and whether we got some information about him. The essential question is whether we got the most information possible from a terrorist who was trying to attack Americans and our allies to prevent future attacks, not whether we gave him Miranda rights. With a case that was as open and shut as Abdulmutallab, without any need to use confessional evidence or classified information, it doesn't prove that the civilian court system is superior to military commissions. His conviction was never realistically in doubt. And defenders of bringing our enemy combatants to the United States civilian trial often cite a number of cases and convictions related to military commissions. Again, I want to reiterate, I'm a strong believer in our civilian court system, but I want to point out some of the downsides to using our civilian court system: the cost of security, the cause of civic disruption in the area, the risk of compromising classified information, and the risk of eventual release of these combatants not to some other country, but into American society, regardless of whether they're convicted in a civilian court. And these concerns aren't academic. I've heard some of my colleagues cite the case of Zacarias Moussaoui, who was a member of al-Qaeda who was involved in the 9/11 attacks, and his involvement spanned nearly a decade, and his case was finally resolved only last year. These proceedings cost millions of dollars and caused substantial civic disruption. For example, the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia was described as an armed camp, with the courthouse complex and surrounding neighborhood becoming a virtual encampment with heavily armed guards, rooftop snipers, bomb-sniffing dogs, blocked streets, and identification checks. If we had tried him at Guantanamo Bay in the military commission there, these security concerns would have been accounted for, and we wouldn't have had to disrupt Virginia to do that. It's not a problem we would confront in our military commission system. In addition, in the civilian trial of 9/11 terrorist Zacarias Moussaoui, sensitive material was inadvertently leaked. Because our civilian court system, as wonderful as they are not set up to deal with cases during a time of war. And so this issue of sensitive material that would naturally be part of the military system is something that they've had to confront in these cases. Moussaoui also mocked 9/11 victims and used the civilian trial as a platform to spew terrorist propaganda. All of these negative side effects of trying a terrorist in a civilian court would have been eliminated or significantly mitigated if he had been detained in military custody and if tried before a military commission. In the case of Omar Abdul Rahman, commonly known as the Blind Sheikh, which has also been cited here today, the civilian trial provided intelligence to Osama bin Laden. So when I hear that case cited as a success, the first thing that comes to my mind, if intelligence was provided to Osama bin Laden, how is that a success when our #1 focus should be on protecting the American people? And that has to be the distinction between trying enemy combatants in a time of war and the very important purpose of our civilian court system. In the case of the Blind Sheikh, According to Michael Mukasey, the former Attorney General, in the course of the prosecuting Omar Abdul Rahman, the government was compelled, as it is in all cases, to charge a conspiracy charge and to turn over a list of unindicted co-conspirators to the defendants. Within 10 days, a copy of that list of unindicted co-conspirators reached bin Laden in Khartoum. The notion that a list, because you had to do it according to our civilian court system, where notice requirements are very important, where generally our court systems are open, would be provided to Osama bin Laden, in my view, is unacceptable, a risk we could have avoided if we treated him as he should have been treated, which is as an enemy combatant and tried in a military commission. Civilian trials of enemy combatants have provided a treasure trove of information to terrorists, and I think those risks have been very discounted by my esteemed colleagues who have come to the floor to oppose my amendment. According to open source reporting, the cost of disclosing information unwisely became clear after the New York trials of bin Laden associates for the 1998 bombings of U.S. embassies in Africa. Some of the evidence indicated that the National Security Agency, the U.S. Foreign Eavesdropping Organization, had intercepted cell phone conversations. Shortly thereafter, bin Laden's organization stopped using cell phones to discuss sensitive operational details. It's also important to note that the record of trying enemy combatants in civilian courts is not as good as it's been made out to be. The administration elevates the so-called underwear bomber case as definitive, but I haven't heard a lot on this floor about Ahmed Gilani. Gilani is a Tanzanian who was charged with a total of 284 counts, including 200-plus counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy in the 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. The bombings killed 224 people, including 12 Americans. He also spent time as Osama bin Laden's bodyguard. He was tried in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. The Department of Justice directed the U.S. Attorney not to seek the death penalty. At trial, the presiding justice excluded from evidence the testimony of a key witness, a Tanzanian, who may have issued statements implicating him in the bombings. And on November 17th of 2010, a jury, after this evidence was excluded, a jury found Gilani only guilty of 1 count of a conspiracy and acquitted him of all 284 other charges, including the murder charges. He murdered 284 people, 12 Americans, and he was acquitted of murder charges. I think that's a case that shows that our civilian court system is not always the best way to deal with enemy combatants. It's very contrary to what I've heard on the cases cited from my opponents of this amendment. Proponents of civilian trials, such as Attorney General Holder, want to criminalize the war, but they fail to cite these cases where the civilian court system leaked classified information to terrorists, or the results, because of excluded evidence, were that terrorists were not held accountable in the way that they should. Military detention for enemy combatants has always been the rule, not the exception. Why are we treating this war any differently? Civilian courts rightly focus on prosecution and miss the most important goal that we have to have, and that is gathering intelligence and protecting the American people against future attacks. Civilian trials for enemy combatants incur tremendous costs, cause civic disruption. That is why the administration itself has reversed its position on trying Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in New York City. They wanted to try the mastermind behind 9/11 in the middle of New York City, but the American people were so outraged by trying someone who is the mastermind of 9/11 in the middle of New York City and the millions of dollars it would have cost to protect the citizens of New York from this horrible individual, giving him a forum in the middle of New York City. Again, the cost associated with protecting the American people in these civilian trials is alone enough to treat them as they should be in military commissions. We raise the risk of compromising classified information, which I've already given you examples of, and we risk the eventual release of these combatants into American society. For these reasons, consistent with a long-standing precedent, we should not be bringing enemy combatants to the United States for civilian trials. If the Obama administration is willing to kill enemy combatants without due process, why is it so against placing these same enemy combatants in military custody and treating them under the law of war and detaining them that way and trying them in military commissions? I think the answer is clear. Unfortunately, I am concerned that it's a political decision rather than putting forth foremost gathering intelligence to protect the American people and treating these enemy combatants as who they are, enemies of our country. I would urge my colleagues to support my amendment. In my view, beyond the policy reasons for not trying enemy combatants in civilian courts, we should ask ourselves, why should we bring foreign terrorists to the United States and give them the legal protections reserved for U.S. citizens and secured by those who have fought and died for those rights? Why do these people deserve access to our American court system? They are our enemies. In the civilian court system, there are rights guaranteed, such as Miranda rights and speedy presentment, that should not be extended. We need to prioritize protecting our country. I think the American people will agree with me when I say that no terrorist should ever hear the words, "You have the right to remain silent." Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. I would urge my colleagues to support my amendment, Amendment 753.
Mr. President. Senator from Oklahoma.